This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to the X-Cast X-Files Podwatch, Episode 9, covering Young at Heart and E.B.E. I'm your host, Zach Moore, and with me is author of Opening the X-Files, A Critical History of the Original Series, Mr. Darren Mooney. What's up, Darren?
Pleasure to be here. How are you?
Great, man, great. I'm honored to be talking about the X-Files with a published author on the subject as well, so everybody knows you're legit, man.
I'm totally legit. Absolutely 100% legit. Although, to be honest, there's actually quite a few of us on here. There's like Keith Ore de Candido, and there's also Chris Knowles as well covering. So it's quite a, I'm in very good company, as X-Files published authors go.
I am by far one of the least qualified people to talk about this show, so I'm looking forward to it. So we're talking about Young at Heart and E.B.E. So we'll get started with Young at Heart. It was written by Scott Coffer and Chris Carter, directed by Michael Lange or Lange. Do you know how to pronounce his name, by the way?
I have no idea. One of the benefits of working in the written word is that I don't have to worry about things like that.
Perfect.
Run like the wind.
And it aired on February 11th, 1994. So kind of a Valentine's Day episode, I guess, huh?
I mean, it's got everything. It's got like a musical performance in there. It's got a clear attraction between Mulder and somebody from his past life. It's got, like, what you want on Valentine's Day is somebody who looks at you like Mulder looks at Reggie and chants, Reggie, Reggie, Reggie. It's even got deep phone breathing going on as well. It's like, it is the perfect Valentine's Day episode. No, it's not. Not at
all. Who is this?
Stop calling me!
You mentioned Reggie. If you're an FBI, it's best never to work with Mulder, because first his ex-partner died and goes to the machine, now his ex-mentor, and Scully would have been next. I mean, I actually, out of all the people in this episode, I feel most sorry for her musician friend, whose recital was ruined by her association with Scully, right?
Yeah, but I mean, on the other hand, it's a great story to tell. It's like, sure, not many people get to perform and stuff like that, and everybody's sort of in the circles. Well, that was a great Mozart, you performed a great bit of Beethoven. Yeah, well, I got held hostage by a guy who was aging backwards with a salamander hand. Beat that.
Speaking about aging backwards and all that stuff, the flashbacks of this episode was odd. I mean, this is something... I don't know if we ever see them presented in this way anywhere else in the series, where it's like 1 year earlier or whatever it was, right? And we see Mulder in court with John Barnett, and I suppose the reason for that was they wanted to establish the old versus young Barnett, right? I mean, what did you take from that?
Like watching Young at Heart, like a number of things sort of jumped out at me. The first one is that it's. Oh, first of all, it's a very typical late first season episode in that it's an episode about somebody who you thought was dead but has returned from the grave in order to wreak terrible vengeance on the people who may have put them there. Like, there's this run through the end of the first season where it's like, we got nothing. Okay, how about doing another ghost story? They're like, well, we've done 3 already. I think 5 is the magic number. So you have Shadows, you have Young at Heart, you have Born Again, you have Roland, you have Lazarus, even stuff like that. But I mean, one of the things about Young at Heart, when you talk about those flashbacks, it's how conventional it feels as a piece of television. Like, it feels like a very early 90s episode. Like, and the flashback that you mentioned with old Barnett and young Barnett, right? One of the things about that is Reggie and Mulder have already told you all the information that you are going to receive from that scene. Like, they told you that Reggie killed the driver and that he killed another FBI agent because Mulder did things by the book. You've heard Reggie talk to Mulder talk to Scully about how sort of Reggie mouthed him and say, I'll get you. But then, like, for the flashback is completely redundant because all it exists to do is to show you what you've already been told by other characters, to actually have Barnett, well, first of all, to have Mulder on the stand talking about everything that you've already heard, and then have John Barnett turn to him and go, I'll get you. And it just feels so stock. It's like an episode of Law and Order or an episode of Nash Bridges or something like that, more than an episode of The X-Files.
No, very good. The old adage is show don't tell. So I guess they told and like, oh, we didn't show. Yeah. Well, let's go show it now. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. Just pick a lane. Show. No, that's an excellent Nash Bridges. Great. Yeah, 90s television does feel very stock television. That's an excellent way to put it. And something that, it's like, did the script run short? Did the episode run short? I don't know, because you could remove that and you still know everything you need to know without seeing him say, I'll get you, Mulder. I'll get you.
I feel like you've conveyed the sense that Barnett really wants to get Mulder through A, having Reggie say it, B, having Barnett call him up, C, having Barnett taunt him, D, having all these shots of people watching Mulder and Mulder feeling like he's being watched. It just feels like a flashback to an early 90s court scene is completely redundant and pointless.
Speaking of redundant, I love Deep Throat, but I felt his appearance here seemed superfluous as well.
Well, I think that, and we're going to talk probably a bit more about Deep Throat when we get to the next episode, but this is like one of the issues with the first season and with Deep Throat in the first season. I think it's something that they learned with when they got to X and Marita later on, is the idea that like Deep Throat becomes this writer's crutch. It's like, okay, well we the writers have worked out what this episode is about. We need to figure out a way to convey that to Mulder, that there's some sort of secret government project going on. I know, let's write a scene with Deep Throat. And it happens in Eve as well, for example, where it's like, okay, well, what if somebody just shows up and delivers a whole big speech that tells the audience everything they need to know about what happened. And it just feels completely superfluous and completely irrelevant. And I think it's one of the reasons why when you get to E.B.E, like the writers felt they needed an episode like E.B.E in order to develop and to flesh out Deep Throat. And to be honest, I ultimately suspect that's why they decided to go the direction that they did with Deep Throat at the end of the season.
What do you know about salamanders, Mr. Mulder?
That's a great impression, by the way.
Thank you. I enjoy doing the Deep Throat impression. I take every opportunity I can to do the Jerry Harding, because he's got such a memorable, like, Southern twang. Like, he's just an old country lawyer here to tell you about the secrets of the CIA. And but not
Have
only
some lemonade, Mr. Mulder.
Exactly. A mint julep, you see. You ain't no chicken hawk, boy. Not only Deep Throat appears in this episode, but kind of the cigarette smoking man, right? Because William B. Davis has a blink and you miss it cameo at the end when they're trying to revive John Barnett, and he's not credited as the cigarette smoking man. He's credited as CIA agent, and I'm sure there's a lot of fanon or headcanon that people have tried to twist that into being part of the mythology, huh? It
is, and I mean, I like to sort of think that if it were the cigarette smoking man, he would still be smoking even though he's in an operating room. But I do think that's an interesting it is an interesting bit of fanish speculation, because you already, as you point out, you already have Deep Throat in there to provide a sense of mythology to what's happening, which is something that happens a lot with the first season episodes, where it seems like everything is a secret government plot until at some point in, say, the second season, they sat down and said, all right, look, we decided aliens. Aliens is the government plot that we're going with here. But I think that with say, Young at Heart, I think that it's kind of cool that you do have, like, maybe the cigarette smoking man has this thing going on the side where he's like, it'd be pretty cool to age in reverse. I'd like to look like Chris Owens again. But I don't mind it too much, because I think it fits with what the show's doing. And I like the idea of the cigarette smoking man just being this avatar, almost this embodiment of like government mythology or government conspiracy before he develops into a character over the course of the next few seasons.
The last thing we'll say about this before we move on is, this is one of, you mentioned the similar themes in the first season. I feel like the first season has a lot of interchangeable titles as well. I mean, we could have named this one Lazarus or Born Again, right? But it's Young at Heart, and it's like, which one is that again? Is that where the guy comes back? Oh, well, that is where the guy comes back, but the guy comes back with a hand this time. He's not a ghost. He doesn't possess
He's not a little girl. No?
Yeah, exactly. All right, our next episode is E.B.E, written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong, directed by William Graham, and aired on February 18th, 1994. And I'll say off the top here, this is one of my favorite episodes of the first season, and probably one of my favorite episodes of the show. I probably put it in my top 25. Our first real Deep Throat episode. He'd always been this mysterious character, as we were just talking about. He was more like a phone-a-friend cheat code for Mulder in a lot of earlier episodes. And this is one where I'm really glad they dedicated an episode to unraveling this guy, or at least making you think they unraveled this guy. And that's what's so interesting about it, which lie to believe and all that. What are your thoughts on this one, Darren?
Well, I mean, I agree entirely. Like, it's a classic episode, and it's a classic on multiple levels. Because first of all, you're right that it's the first time Deep Throat feels like a character rather than a plot element. Like, he feels like a person who has a history and who has a reason for what he's doing. Like, because for the first stretch of the season, it's like, oh, I'm going to help you, Mr. Mulder. I do a terrible Deep Throat impression.
Help you, Mr. Mulder.
Yeah.
They've been here for quite some time.
I say.
I say.
But I do love that, like, he's such a plot device in the first half of the season, but E.B.E is basically like, well, what if he's a real person who has real motivations? And even if you don't believe what he tells you in E.B.E, which, by the way, is a twist that I absolutely love about E.B.E. It's one of the first episodes that makes the conspiracy mythology postmodern and provides that wonderful X-Files insulation of what if a major character who provides a key piece of information is lying, which is basically like Chris Carter can use that to paste over just about any continuity error that exists. So why...
Trust no one is right, huh?
Yeah, it is. Like, so how do we reconcile any of this with black oil? Oh, cigarette smoking man was lying. So what about bees? Oh, don't worry. Skinner was lying. It's a great approach to sort of conspiracy and mythology, because it invites this idea that what you're seeing on the X-Files is not, like, objectively verifiable truth. Is the idea that, like, truth is something that won't be handed to Mulder by Deep Throat in the middle of a field or with a piece of paper. That truth is something that Mulder has to discover for himself. And I think that's a really clever idea, because it opens up more storytelling opportunities down the road, and you get, like... without this episode, you wouldn't have, say, the relationship that Mulder has with X or Marita Covarrubias later in the year, where there's sort of a bit more give and take and a bit more sort of energy in the dynamic, rather than just like, well, you're kind of my surrogate dad, so I guess I'll trust you on this. But I think that there's a lot to say for that. And I think there's also just it really captures, and I was rewatching this, and what really captured me about that is this idea of America as a series of, like, highways and byways, and the fact that, like, there's this network of truckers who travel coast to coast, listening to Coast FM, ironically enough, but with, like, labs in the back, and that, like, you, as Mulder says, like, this truck drove across America. You could pass it on the road and think it was hauling auto parts or furniture, livestock, whatever. Nobody would have suspected it was hauling a craft from another world. There's this wonderful sense of the uncanny lurking just beneath the surface, which I love about it.
Yeah, I think it's a microcosm of, like, the entire show in just this one episode. If you just distill the X-Files down to one episode, like, this would be a great example of the greater whole, because it's got the conspiracy, it's got the Mulder and Scully doing their own thing, it's got the alien factor, it's got the lies, and who do you trust, and there's so much intrigue here, and, like, if I wanted to show someone, like a small sample of episodes of, like, this is what the X-Files is all about, I'd definitely show them this one.
It really is. It's, like, such a beautiful distillation. And I mean, like, earlier in the season, you had episodes like, you obviously had the pilot, you had Deep Throat, you had Fallen Angel, you had even Conduit, for example, which were like, okay, well, we can point to those as, like, those are stories that are about aliens, and therefore they'll tie into what the mythology will be. But if you look at E.B.E, E.B.E is the episode that has, like, the largest footprint, I think, across, like, this is what the mythology is going to be going forward. So, like, I mean, obviously you can point to episodes like Musings of a Cigarette Smoking Man, but you really get this sense that, like, there is this vast, like, you can't trust anybody, which comes back again in, say, Colony or Endgame. But, like, the government is somehow involved with these aliens, that there's more going on than, like, abductions in fields. It's like, it's a proper industrial process that's happening, that's tied into, and you get this, and I love, one of the things I love about the Morgan and Wong episodes, to be fair, it's also the Carter episodes as well, is a sense that you get the sense that they've lurked online on the fringe corners of conspiracy sort of newspapers and newsletters and stuff like that. So you get everything from, like, Gulf War syndrome here to, like, the idea the government is tracking people through $20 notes. You also get the lone gunman, which is fantastic.
Yes, this is the first appearance of the lone gunman, and you're like, oh wow, these guys they're here earlier than I thought, because you think about them like you think about Skinner, right? They're always there, and like, oh, actually they're not always there, and they're finally here at the end of season 1. So it was great to see them, and how they were just so beloved by the fandom that they became recurring characters, because they easily could have been like a Max Finnig and be like a one-off, or one-off, and then they revisit maybe once more in the show. But it's great that they just endear themselves so quickly to the fans, and they just have such strong personalities, just because I think visually too they're also different. Like, they just fit together so inappropriately well. They're such a memorable group of characters, and I just love them. And I love they should get their own spinoff. I think that'd be great. A great show.
I mean, I think you get at least 8 episodes out of it, maybe 13 at a push. I think I could see it running. I'm going to be honest. I think if you got Michael McKean involved somehow, I think you'd just be on to gold. But it's funny you should mention visually, because I think that's one of the things that, like, when Morgan and Wong sort of talk about creating them, they were inspired by, I think they saw a UFO convention where there were 3 people standing together, where one of them was wearing a Ramones t-shirt, one of them was in a business suit, and one of them was kind of like a sleazy short guy in a leather jacket with fingerless gloves. And they're like, this is a really odd combination of people. Maybe we should do something with that. And they do. They fit together so perfectly that it's just beautiful,
For sure, absolutely. And and just to wrap it up, E.B.E, an excellent episode. Season 1's underrated often, I feel, but this one is an A+ right in the middle of some other questionable episodes, but this is definitely a classic.
It definitely is, and I think that it's sort of like it's at a stage where the first season's sort of solidifying into what it's going to be. Like, there's still a sense that it's about the first season mythology is largely rooted in the Cold War, and then it sort of, as the series goes on, it sort of shifts to focusing on the Second World War. And this is at a point where it seems like it's still figuring out what it is. So you still have this idea that, that basically it's all ties back to the Cold War. Like, during the conversation with the lone gunman, that, this aliens might be created by the CIA fearing the loss of an enemy in the Cold War. And then you get back and, like, as the series goes on, you discover that they've been there since, 1947, that they've actually been there since the end of the Second World War. But I mean, even then you have, like, this idea, and, like, it's funny you should mention, like, 2012 being the beginning. Like, it feels like the X-Files has circled back in the revival that was recently released to some of the ideas in E.B.E that have sort of fallen by the wayside. So, for example, like, there's the great monologue at the very end of the episode, which is beautiful, where Mulder wants to see the alien and arrives just a moment too late and sees the empty room, which is sort of striking of itself. But there's a bit where Deep Throat's talking about how he killed an alien in Hanoi. And basically he talks about how it stared up at him with his eyes, how it was so innocent, how maybe it didn't recognize a gun, or maybe it didn't know what was coming, but he sort of, like, he looked at that innocent alien and he felt really guilty about ending its life. And there's this sense that, like, maybe aliens are pure, and maybe aliens are optimistic, and maybe aliens are basically decent, but human beings are terrible. And then sort of it's interesting to contrast that with where the mythology goes, because the mythology basically then goes on and suggests that actually, well, aliens are a massively corrupting influence on people. But you sort of, like, when the revival series came back, it felt like they sort of circled back around to this idea that maybe aliens are decent and maybe people are just really terrible. Where the cigarette smoking man talks about how aliens came to Earth to prevent the global warming and all this sort of stuff. And they were trying to help us, and mankind sort of screwed it up. And it's kind of fun to see, like, after 20 years, circling back to an idea that was nestled in such an early episode.
Man is the true villain. And just to wrap it all up, I love Scully's line in here. She says, "The truth is out there, but so are lies." It's like, well, there you go. Nothing is nothing. There's no reliable source anywhere. And that's what this episode, when you boil it down, that's what it's all about.
We can keep the show running forever.
All right, Darren, well, it's been fun talking about these 2 episodes of The X-Files with you today. If people want to find you online, where can they find you?
They can find me. I write at the Movie Blog with a 0. I host the 250, which is a podcast, which is available on iTunes, and where all good podcasts are sold. Also on the Black Hole Media Podbean as well, which is very cool. And as you mentioned at the start of the episode, I'm releasing a book opening The X-Files, which is available now on amazon.com.co.uk, all the other places where good books are available. Please, if you're interested in The X-Files, think about picking it up. If you're not interested in The X-Files, think about running to your local library and asking them to pick it up. It would be much appreciated.
Excellent. Good pitch there, Darren. Good pitch. As for me, you can find me personally on Twitter at MooreOnZach. That's MooreOnZach. I'm also the host of my own podcast, Always Hold On to Smallville, where we talk about each and every episode of that young Superman show. You can find us on Twitter at AlwaysMallville with 1 S. And I'm also the host of a Star Trek podcast called Standard Orbit, where we talk about the original series on the Trek FM network. And you can find us on Twitter at TrekFM. As for the Xcast, you can find us on Twitter at the X_cast and our Facebook page and group, the Xcast X-Files Podcast Fan Group. So just look up the Xcast on Facebook and you will find us there. So the Podwatch will be back tomorrow, and I myself will be back tomorrow as well, covering Miracle Man and Chase. But until then, trust no one.